What is going on, our Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and this collaboration has finally happened. I know you guys have been waiting for this since forever, but me and Thomas finally got together, and hopefully we have a good discussion on both intermittent fasting and the keto diet.
Yeah, man. No, I super appreciate you coming all the way out here. I mean, it's all the way across the country to make this happen. So you guys definitely have an awesome advocate for your health here. Simply the fact that he's traveling literally across the country to do this collaboration because you guys asked for it. So, like, seriously, thank you very much, man.
Of course. Thank you.
So, what do you want to dive into? What do you want to start with?
We go ahead and talk about the correlation between the 1 meal a day diet and the 16-8 diet. I think that's one of the things where my audience wants to know where I stand on it, and also where you stand on intermittent fasting in that respect. I consider both intermittent fasting. I consider if you eat 1 meal a day, I consider that an intermittent fasting protocol. And I also, of course, the 16-8 is in a protocol, an intermittent fasting protocol as well. But I feel that there are benefits to having a longer fast than having a shorter fast. But when it comes to, but there's a cutoff time as well. Yeah. I'm a proponent of not going too far all the time. Sometimes, every once in a while, if you want to go a little bit longer, like 48 hours, 72 hours or whatever it is, I wouldn't recommend to do that. But if you want to, you can, but there is like a point where there's things that go against you, I feel.
Yeah, it's sort of a line of diminishing return. And I mean, there's studies have shown that like after 36, 72 hours, the results actually start to kind of diminish.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
It's, and the goals kind of shift. What you're after with your fast ends up shifting, depending on the length of fast that you're doing. So if you're going for a longer fast, you might have a little bit more of an autophagy effect. You might have a little bit more of a cellular rejuvenation effect versus the body composition effects that kick in a lot sooner.
Exactly. You hit it right on the head with that. The autophagy effects continue to grow the longer you fast. Yeah. So if you keep going, you'll have that. But then you want to look at the full context of everything that you're leaving on the table to get that autophagy.
Exactly.
So it's like, okay, well, you're leaving, certain muscle glucose will be disrupted after, a specific time. For everyone, it's different, but usually around that 48-hour period, if you go into like 72 hours, muscle glucose might be disrupted.
You're exactly right.
And your body can run on ketones. Your body's very effective at running on ketones, but it does it in a way where it's like 70, 75, 80%. But sometimes, every once in a while, your body needs a little bit of glucose.
Yeah, it definitely does.
The brain definitely needs a little bit of glucose. And if they don't get that for a long period of time, it will unfortunately tap into some muscle tissue just to break that down and give you that glucose that you need. But if you are efficient and you make sure that you have these fasts happen shorter than those long time frames of 48 hours, you can hit some autophagy effects. Not as potent as it would be if it was 72 hours or 4 days or whatever, but definitely some effects of that. And then you also get all the benefits of the insulin being at baseline, utilizing ketones for the energy as opposed to oxidating fat as opposed to using glucose from food.
So, and one of the things that you mentioned or alluded to earlier that I'd really like to address is sort of the 16-8 variation versus sort of the OMAD and kind of
which is the 1 meal a day, just to clarify.
In the period, in the gray area in between. Yeah. So if you go way back when to look at some of my older videos, I actually mentioned that the 16-8 is a great approach to get started with fasting, but quite frankly, the benefits of fasting don't really begin until 16 hours. So I've said this frequently, is like a 16-8 fasting period where you're fasting for 16 hours and then eating during an 8-hour period of time is sort of the bare minimum that you really want to do. That's sort of set in stone as like, at this point, you're considered intermittent fasting. Now, for all intents and purposes, the effects start at 16 hours and they start to compound at 17, 18, 19. So the longer that you go, the better. Now, whether or not you're doing a 1 meal a day approach or not, the fact still stands that if you push it a little bit longer, you're going to have exponential positive effect if you go a little bit longer than 16 hours. But usually when people are first starting out, it's a hard pill for them to swallow to even go 16 hours. So
That's true.
I usually sell it to them in that sense. Be like, start with 16 hours, get the benefits, start getting the benefits, but also know in the back of your mind that you really should be pushing it longer. So like, I'm a big fan of, personally, I fast about 20 to 21 hours when I usually fast, and I do that 3-ish times a week. So that's my ideal of intermittent fasting. Fasting somewhat intermittently. It's like kind of a toss-up on the words, right? So intermittent fasting, does it mean you're intermittently fasting or intermittently eating throughout the course of the day or during a set period? Or does it mean that you're introducing fasting periods intermittently throughout the week? Potato, potato, kind of depends on how you look at it. And I don't think anybody knows the honest answer there. But that's kind of my approach. The longer fasts, a little bit less periodically, so in terms of like 3 times a week, and go for that 20, 21 hours. Personally, I'm like a 2-meal a day kind of guy when I do that. And I break my fast and then I have my bigger meal.
Yeah. But I feel like you're definitely hitting the marks there. But when it comes to how many times you want to fast, I feel that it definitely should be dependent on the person and how they feel.
For sure.
If the person feels confident that they can go ahead and do a fast every single day, they can go ahead and, they should be able to go ahead and do that. But if they do feel that on Saturdays and Sundays there's a family get together or something to that effect, then you don't have to fast on those days if it's too difficult for you to fast. And also, but in terms of like metabolic rate, when we were talking about metabolic rate, I feel that the metabolic rate in and of itself isn't affected because of the fasting. I feel like it's more affected because of the caloric restriction. So if you have a caloric restriction and you're consistently in that caloric restriction, then that may mess with your basal metabolic rate. But I think that if you can maintain a caloric limit or a caloric intake while utilizing intermittent fasting, that should still keep you at a good level where your metabolic rate is still either increased or kept at a good level where you're not reducing it too much and losing the ability to burn calories. Excuse me. To burn calories simply because of the fact that your metabolic rate has dropped. I was having a conversation with Dr. Stephen Anton, which is the chief in clinical research and geriatric research and aging. And he was talking about the 15 clinical trials from that interview. And he said that fat-free mass is one of the primary drivers of metabolic rate. And he said that when he looked at the participants, the ones that were doing the intermittent fasting, they actually, which was the 16-8 method, by the way, they actually had no reduction in fat-free mass, while those that were doing the caloric restriction, they did have a reduction in fat-free mass. So the fat mass in and of itself was reduced in both. A little bit more, I think it was in the intermittent fasting group, but the fat-free mass was protected completely in the 16-8 group.
That's interesting. And it brings to light, so if you say that your calories, if they're at a certain level, your basal metabolic rate won't change or will change, or either way, the hard part is we don't really know, and I've talked about this in videos before, we don't know at what point, at what very second in time we're measuring the basal metabolic rate. So if we're looking at it over the course of 24 hours, sure, but if we're also looking at it from the sense that if you're consuming X amount of calories during your eating window, you're still having X amount of calories or 0 calories coming in during your non-eating window that could lead to that same end result. So basically what I'm saying is, if we look at how many calories we're consuming in a minute rather than an hour, or an hour rather than a day, then starts bringing to light all these other questions. Well, do our calories really matter at that rate when we're actually, so, and again, it's kind of this, go in this big circle, because the fact is we just don't know. Our metabolic rate is going to shift so much throughout the course of the day to a point that we can never possibly measure. So for you, you might be able to consume, I'm just going to hypothetically, you might be able to consume 3,000 calories in your eating window and stay in enough of a calorie surplus per 24-hour period of time to constitute staying at your weight and constitute keeping your basal metabolic rate where it's at. I could be in a completely different ballgame, and we'll never really know. We'll never really know how long we fast and what's happening during the period in which we're fasting, hormone-sensitive lipase, different hormones that are at effect. It's going to change from day to day. So I guess my rebuttal, for lack of a better term with that, is I don't think we're ever going to really know what our basal metabolic rate is and how we can manipulate it on a 24-hour scale, because a 24-hour scale is just a number. Like, we're just giving ourselves a 24-hour scale because it's easy to measure because it's day in and day out. Yeah. But if we actually back it up and we look at, okay, well, let's forget about hours, let's forget about days, and let's just look at calories as a whole. It all depends on what time frame we're looking at it at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from in that respect. You're not looking at it as a daily thing. You're looking at it as just what it is in terms of calories in and of itself. Yeah, just the aggregate of calories, which I completely understand. I completely understand that position in terms of controlling, making sure that you're keeping your metabolic making sure you're controlling your basal metabolic rate and keeping it at a good level. But I do think that there are benefits that intermittent fasting, because of the fact that it is protecting fat-free mass,
for sure,
is lending to the fact that you're doing things that can increase or put you in a better position in terms of your basal metabolic rate.
That's a super good point. So when we look at fat-free mass or lean body mass as being your primary driver, whether you're 1 meal a day or whether you're 16/8 or even ketosis, which has some very powerful anti-catabolic properties, you are in effect driving your metabolism a little bit hotter, again, for lack of a better term, so that you can justify those extra calories, so you can justify a little bit of a faster metabolism. So that's a really good point, because when you look at fat-free mass, and that's kind of the elephant in the room that people don't really want to talk about all the time, because it's kind of this mysterious, ambiguous thing. Like, people, without even getting a DEXA scan, and even then, it's still pretty ambiguous. They don't really know what their fat-free mass is, or they like to think that their fat-free mass might be a little bit more than it is.
Exactly.
They're going to justify it however they really want and try to find the easiest path, because it's just human nature. So that's where it gets really, really tricky. But that's a really good, solid point, because if we can just preserve the lean body mass, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's it's pretty wild. For every 1 pound of lean body mass that you have, it's X amount of calories that you burn. I mean, it's pretty powerful. Yeah. So the more that you preserve that, you're putting yourself in a pretty darn powerful state to burn a lot more fat, whether you're fasting or not fasting at that point in time.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that this was a good discussion in regards to intermittent fasting, the metabolic rate, and if one should or shouldn't. There are so many different factors that could determine if one should do this every day or not. And I feel like you've brought up a lot of good points in your videos in the past about why one shouldn't do it every day. But also, I feel like if someone wanted to go that route, it shouldn't be too much of a detriment to them metabolically or physiologically if they wanted to fast every day.
For sure, yeah. Especially if they can keep their calories up.
Yeah, that's the most important.
It's definitely the important thing, and that's where we can save this for another video. But I mean, realistically, that's where following that approach along with a ketogenic approach, in my opinion, is very powerful if you're doing the 1 meal a day, because it lends you the ability to get that caloric density that some people might struggle with. Personally, I get very bloated very easily. Like, I've always been that way. So as soon as I start having too many carbs, I get really distended and I can't eat anymore. I feel kind of nauseous. So for me, keto has allowed me to be able to get that caloric density that I want. So perhaps we save that for a different video and talk a little bit more about the kind of the interrelationship there between keto and fasting.
Yeah, for sure.
So, well, man, again, I appreciate you coming all the way out here, and it's a pleasure to be on your channel, because I mean, I know we have a lot of crossover with a lot of our followers, but they've been looking for this, and now it kind of gives them the fact that we always
think they've been waiting for about 6 months. So I do apologize for the for the timing, but we had to get our schedules together and everything, but we made it happen for you guys. So.
And one thing I will say on record that I respect the heck out of you about is every time you have a rebuttal with me, you do it in a very cordial way, in a very professional way, where you are by no means ever undermining me or anything like that. You're always presenting the facts, and you and I are friends, so it's not like we're ever coming at each other in a combative way. We have intelligent discussions like gentlemen, and we have our disagreements on some things, but at the end of the day, we're both proponents of fasting, and we're both proponents of just you guys getting healthy, period.
Exactly. Number one.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Thank you.